I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. Storytelling is easy to talk about and hard to do. On this episode of On Brand, I'm joined by John Elbing, Chief Storybuilder Officer at Standpoint, to unpack how his story-building approach helps startups and brands clarify their values, sharpen their pitch, and actually connect with a framework so it's effective. Now, it's a #1 best-selling book as well. My interview with John is coming right up. But first, John Elbing, welcome to On Brand.
Hi, Nick. Happy to be here. So starting the year really strong.
Starting the year with story. I feel like there's a timelessness to that advice of, what we need, regardless of the technological shifts, is story. Get good at telling your story. Oh, I think one of my most valuable skills is my storytelling. A lot of us recognize its importance. We might even think that we're good at it. But what are we actually getting wrong about story?
So I feel that storytelling has become such a buzzword that everyone is giving tips about storytelling. And it ends up being how to put a nice coat of paint on your story to make it pop and things and how you should start and all that. And so, my method is called story building because I felt it was really important to know what story to tell. Then you can play with it and make a movie or a website or whatever, or stand up on stage or something. But first, you have to really understand who you're talking to, your customer, and then and build their story. And so I think, and a lot of people skip that and sort of jump into the tips and tricks and make it fun. But then the story itself is lacking in what makes it engaging and connection and all that.
Well, I love that approach, and I'm a big word nerd, so I love the idea of story building versus storytelling, and this being on brand. When I talk about brand building, I prefer the label of brand building as opposed to branding, where I think, we think of, it's not just because I'm in the Midwest here, but of like branding cattle, where the other party is passive, even held down, and you're, branding them with your impression, your mark, whether they want to or not. And that's just not how it works. And I think that the metaphor of building fits a lot better for branding. Why does building versus telling matter when it comes to story?
I feel that too many brands tell their story, ignoring who they're talking to. Right. And so what I try to do is flip the script, and you tell your customer story, and you fit into that story at some point. But they're the hero, and they're the protagonist, and and you're following them through what will make their life better, and so they can relate with that. And you're just an actor in their story to help them along the way, instead of pounding your chest saying how wonderful you are, and sort of forgetting that there's a client out there that is living their own life.
So in my role here teaching at the University of Iowa, I work with our entrepreneurial center and work with young startups on their pitches, on their story. You do a lot of coaching with startups. What is it that you see because I see that same recognition of founders among, the story's important, but there's a struggle in telling it.
I think there's even the struggle of knowing what in the hell they're talking about.
Right.
And so what I found really interesting is that I catch them with this promise of a marketing foundational story. And that story they'll be able to do their marketing, they'll do their website, they'll do their campaigns, they'll talk to their clients and all that. So they come in energized with that idea to say, hey, this is going to help me be successful. And then we sit back and we go through who their customer is, take their customer standpoint. My brand is Standpoint because, it's so important to take the other person's standpoint. And by the time, so I have canvases and post-its, and we go through this whole thing. And actually, they come out saying, "Oh, damn, that's what we do. That's how," and it creates focus. I worked with this company where I asked the 10 people to say, "What do you do?" And they had 10 different stories. So they come out of this with an alignment to say, "Okay, this is our story. I mean, this is our customer story, but this is what we do, how we help, how we make people's lives better." Oh, and then we get this marketing message that can help us too. But there's this strong part. It's kind of the Trojan horse of positioning strategy, where you use storytelling and building the story and building it as a team and building it with the people that are in contact with the customers to come out with this clear focus for the company.
I'm so glad you mentioned your own business's name, Standpoint, as well, because I think, again, with my love of words and naming, I think that's a great brand name. But I think it connects right back to, you wisely had us back up a bit there with talking with founders, because I think what gets in the head a lot is, because we think of most of us, our first exposure to the idea of entrepreneurship is hearing the story of some founder who did something. And I think sometimes there's a conflating that happens of the founder's story as opposed to what the brand story is, that what it is that you're creating, the problem that you're solving. And I think that it really, at the risk of sounding like an advertisement for your business, comes down to identifying that standpoint. That's what it seems like we're missing a lot.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's a lot of this thing where, I started in the garage and all this stuff,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
people don't care. I mean, they care later. So once I'm really interested, I think, who are these people? And then you think, oh wow, and then you sort of maybe look at where they came from and what they were doing and why they're doing it and all that. But first, you have to, you have to recognize yourself in this brand and why it would be interesting for you before you get to the point where you're interested in who's behind it.
Right. So with that, so that's what my story is. That's a great light bulb. What if someone is listening to this and thinking, "Oh, geez, I'm just telling my garage story and thinking that I'm talking about what the brand story is." What if the light bulb's only half on and they don't know what the story that they're building is, or they
So,
haven't identified a standpoint?
so what I believe strongly is that we go through 3 steps when we encounter a brand. And the first step I call recognition. You have to recognize yourself in the brand. Then there's perception. You have to understand what it does and why it's interesting. And then a third one I call projection, where you have to sort of imagine what it's going to be like. And I feel that most brands talk about what they do, but they forget. So I'm looking for a software. I'm an independent consultant. I'm looking for some tool, and it says we're the best tool for teams. And I think I'm not a team, and I've scrolled by. They've lost me forever because I don't recognize myself in what they're doing. But if there's someone said this, we do this great service for independent consultants that live in Switzerland that have white beard and a cat, and I don't know what they're doing yet, and I'll think, ooh, well, they understand me, and I'm already a little bit engaged and more open to listening to what this service will be. So that first step for people listening is this idea to say, if your ideal client lands on your website or sees one of your ads or whatever it is, will they think, "Ooh, yeah, that's for me," before fully understanding what the service or product is going to be? Because you really get the people that you target, and you sort of can avoid the ones that wouldn't be necessarily the right clients.
You know,
Um,
go ahead.
no, no, go. I'll come
Well,
back to the next steps
I
after.
I was just going to say, I think that's so important, understanding who your person is. And I think sometimes we, the brands that we spend a lot of time talking about that always come up, Nike, Apple, we think, oh, well, they have the massive budgets to do amazing things that I could never do. So I can't do that. But if you look at the heart of everything from their earliest days, it was understanding that step that you're talking about right now. It was, here's to the dreamers, Picasso, Jim Henson. And I'm at home as a creative toiling away, and I may not be those people, but I think of myself as trying to do what they're doing. And I think that's a,
I think
a
Nike, there's an interesting point because what you're trying to do, a lot of companies go into personas and think we target, young adults, whatever kind of thing and all that. And so Nike, so there's this myth that there's actually people that buy sneakers to run. Everyone buys them to look cool, right? So Nike is targeting the person who wants to run faster, but is also targeting the person that wants to, get the girl, be cool and be part of the thing. So a lot of sports brands say, you're going to be better at sports. And that misses out on the lifestyle. But what does Nike say? Just do it. But just do it, is a way of saying, that 20, they're targeting the 20-year-old that runs, but they're targeting the 20-year-old that wants to look cool. And that is actually the same person at different parts of the same day. But you're catching them where they sort of say, yes, I want to accomplish something. And it can be sports, it can be in life, it can be whatever it is. And other brand, often companies will come to me and say, hey, we do these two different things. How do we make one story? And I think Nike is very good at making that story where, yes, it's about sports, but people feel it as daring and accomplishment. And that catches that extra spark.
On Brand will be right back after this. Now, back to the show. So I took us down the rabbit hole of the first step of seeing yourself. What's next?
So next is, or what I call perception, is the fact that you have to understand what the product service is. So there's so much out there. I think a lot is around category and differentiation. I mean, you have to figure out, you have to put it in a box. People want you to put you in a box. So they have to understand. So if you have something crazy and new and people say, what is that? You've probably lost them. So to be clear in what you represent, this idea of a standpoint, there can be all these things where you have to be clear about what the service is. And I think, a lot of companies do present what they do. That's the obvious part. But some don't do it quite, well enough. But then once I say, so I'm an independent consultant and I think I should get a CRM to help build my business, customer relationship management. And, the one was for teams, so I forgot. But then I found one that was targeting independent consultants and has AI this and automate that. And I'm really happy. And then I think, well, okay, but then I have to buy it, install it, and set it up, and then copy the stuff from my Excel spreadsheet and look through my emails, and then use my old system while I'm using the new system. I'm gonna do this, but maybe next week, and then I don't come back. And there's this idea that even if you're really interested in the product, you project, and there's a lot of these doubts and obstacles. Will they be there? I mean, am I going to get support? How is it going to work? What do I do? All this stuff. So in the story, if you can bring them along the path of what it's actually going to be like to live with this product or service, and to remind them of the stakes, if you don't work with us, you're going to keep struggling with this, and close your eyes and imagine how your life will be better. And so you end where they've gone that extra step. If we look at this as a pipeline, so by having a strong recognition at the beginning, you have a better quality pipeline because you have the right people that are looking at what you're doing. But then the ones that are interested, they're already sort of pre-living what you're selling to them. So when they engage, they're a couple steps farther along, instead of sort of doubting and things and maybe trying, but all this doubts keep them back, and there's this struggle at that point. They've gone past that because you've held their hand a little bit longer in their story.
So the first step is the perception of I see myself in what this offering is. The second step takes that, like you just said, kicks it up a notch of now I see what the world is like with this new reality that this makes possible. I see that my life without a CRM is so tangled and messy, and that this will create this wonderful new world for me.
Exactly.
So, what is next?
So my thing is in these 3 steps. Is recognition, then perception is just, you do present your product and, show how you're different and all that. And then the third step is projection, where you help them see what it'll be like.
Okay.
So those are the 3 things. So then I have all this, method with canvases and things to help people figure out what goes in each of those steps. How do I describe my client so they feel that they recognize themselves? I had a software company that sort of said, our users, and use that word. I'm not a user. Me as the thing. I'm a marketer. But so they used a label that fit for them as the client instead of fitting what the person, how they felt about themselves.
I think maybe like a New Year's resolution, could we just maybe stop with users everywhere? I mean, with the label users. I think it's such a leftover from the late 90s and early aughts, and it's not gonna win you any friends, which is in itself a better label, or at the very least, people. We could do so much better.
One thing I also find is that companies often sort of have, we have this solution, so people must have the problem that fits that solution perfectly.
Uh-huh.
But that's not necessarily what's going on in people's minds. I worked with an NGO that was doing water purification in developing countries. And normally what you do is you ship chlorine by truck and you put it in the water and it purifies the water. And they do a thing where you produce the chlorine locally instead of shipping it. And I said, what's the problem you solve? And they said, well, people get sick, so we save lives. And actually we worked on it. And the problem is that trucks get stuck in the mud. So when they were selling it to these people in the field, what kept them up at night was, damn, there was a storm and that truck's not going to get here. Of course, at some point they're going to save lives, but that was too abstract. It was, this really pinpointed a thing that said, oh yes, that's us, in the minds of who their customers.
I love that, and a great kind of identification of something that's hidden that is an even bigger need. So you walked us through the framework. I would imagine, if I were to go out on a limb and say that that framework is the focus of your book of the same name.
Absolutely. So yes, I worked with bits and pieces, and I developed this methodology, and I worked with companies and startups and refined it because if they didn't understand, until I finally thought, well, damn, this seems to help people. So it came out last spring, and that was really a fun project to finally get it out the door.
So, with it being out the door and in the world, is there anything that along the way in your work has surprised you about the response to it, the questions people have, the light bulbs going off?
Um, so, well, yeah, I mean, I'm often surprised, and that makes what I do so much fun. So, when I said that these startups were sort of caught with the marketing message and then were surprised to get strategy. Well, sometimes I work with companies and they need positioning strategy, and then they're surprised to get a marketing message. And so, depending where you come from, you can get this sort of several levels. I think I think one of the things is just to see the light bulb go off in people's eyes. So we one thing we look at is the customer's aspiration. Everyone talks about the problem, but somehow it's only a problem because it blocks an aspiration. You don't have a problem out in the thing. And if I say, you know, your lawn is a mess, that's a problem. But if I say, hey, you'd really like to have this great environment, but gardening after coming home from work is so difficult. That problem is much more salient than if you just say, your yard's a mess. Um, and so if you can find a way of understanding what they're trying to accomplish and at the same time what their challenges is, that contrast can be very powerful because stories is about emotion. So the idea is you push that emotion up by saying, you want to be successful or whatever, you're on this mission to do this thing, and that high emotion, but you're stuck or you're this or you're that. And so then, you get the frustration, and then you give a solution, and then you talk about the, but hey, there's other issues that you would still have. And then, oh, but look how your life will be better. And that sort of roller coaster of emotion connects to all those actual points and emotions of your audience and is very engaging.
That is, again, a powerful connection of the dots there. So, if a leader is listening to this and is thinking, "Oh, I've got to get to work on my story," if they were to fix one thing about their story after listening to us, what's a good thing to jump in on?
So I think one thing you can try pretty easily is you take your customer's standpoint. Sorry to say the word standpoint a million times during the thing. That
It's a very on-brand thing for you to say.
you you try to forget about yourself a minute and see your customer in how, in their aspiration, their problem, their moments. Uh, you know, Without this idea that, okay, their problem is they don't have my solution. No, I mean, they don't know about your solution. So how do they feel? What are they thinking? What are their problems? What are their things? And then how can you connect what your service or product to that, instead of starting with your product and say, okay, how can I figure out a problem that fits my solution? And if you can step back a little bit, and suddenly things sort of light up. And often also they can sort of say, hey, oh, I could add this little thing that would make a big difference to my customer that I didn't think of, that doesn't cost me much, but because suddenly I see how it works. One of these, just talking about taking their standpoint there. I saw this ad for a plumber, and it seems like less the case in Switzerland, but in the States, you're never quite sure when they'll show up or if they'll show up, and people feel that they sort of have to take a day off just to wait for the plumber. So their ad was, "We're on time." It wasn't, "We're a good plumber," because people weren't doubting that the plumber
Right.
will do his job. What they were doubting is to say, can I count on this person to come actually at 10 when they said they would come? And so they really, put themselves in their customer's mind and said, what is their worry? And the worry is that. Of course, then you have to follow through and actually be on time. But that's quite a differentiator.
So we've talked plumbers, we've talked Nike, Apple, CRMs. It is now my chance to get to ask you, John, for a brand that has made you smile recently.
So I worked with Felco, and Felco is the world leader in garden shears in Switzerland. And it's for years and years, it was a professional brand. The people working in the fields, they would buy Felco. It was 5 times more expensive, but it would last your lifetime instead of having to change it every 2 years. And they finally created a website thinking, well, let's try. It's 80-year-old company. And they found that there were fans. There was a kind of the gentleman gardener profile that were so fans that they had tattooed Felco like you tattoo Harley Davidson on your body. And so then we worked on stories for these completely different world views, from the real professional to the sort of elite kind of gardener to the all these things. So we split up the different brands and made all these things so that they had 3 different universes with 3 different brands with 3 different aspirations and problems. And now they created a book for kids, how to garden every month of the year, what to do in January, what to do in February, kind of thing, and then tools for kids. So they're really getting into, what would a kid do and how, So it's a little bit, okay, let's get them hooked on Felco really young, but I thought, really cute. So that was really interesting. I work with so many high tech, deep tech, really crazy startups and all that. So to work with just a company that makes these tools and visit their factory and all that, that was really fun.
Well, I love that story. And as you can see, even hearing about that brand made me smile as well. John, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
So the easiest is my website, which is standpoint.ch, and .ch is Switzerland. So standpoint.ch, and so you'll find things of what I do. There's a sort of a summary of the method, how to find the book, and so go to the contact form, say you're coming from On Brand Podcast, and I'll set up, we can have an hour Zoom call, and you can tell me about your brand, and I can give you some tips on recognition, perception, and projection.
That is awesome. Well, thank you, John. And we will link up to that in our show notes, which folks can find at onbrandpodcast.com. John Elbing, thanks for being on brand with us.
Well, thank you. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to listening to it again.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.